My name is Tony. This presentation is for Dr. Alexenko's Comparative Higher Education course. The content for my presentation comes from Isaac Frauman's chapter called Establishing a New Research University, the Higher School of Economics, the Russian Federation. Isaac Frauman's chapter is in turn taken from the World Bank's book called The Road to Academic Excellence, the Making of World-Class Research Universities. It's important to know that Frauman's chapter is not a scholarly article, and it is not the result of empirical research. What is important to know about Frauman's text is that it represents a narrative, and in this case it's his own narrative about the birth, difficulties, and rise of HSE, the Higher School of Economics. The aim of my presentation is to provide you with an interpretation of Frauman's text, because it would be all too easy to include the information as he presents it in his chapter and represent that back to you without much thought. So instead, I aim to give you an interpretation of what Frauman writes as a rather straightforward story of rags to riches. And this rags to riches theme is touched on in the first page of Frauman's chapter when he writes about HSE beginning its existence in 1992 and currently holding a place in the top 10 out of 1,600 Russian universities. So I'll be examining HSE as differentiation, much in the same way that love and infatuation are similar, but we would not call them the same. We can describe HSE as oil compared to the water of another university. Water and oil are similar in that they're both liquid, but they're also quite different. For example, they both have different functions, they have different odors, different freezing points, etc. Russia experienced extreme economic upheaval in the 90s. The transition from a Marxist model to a free market model was overseen by a gentleman named Yegor Gaider. Mr. Gaider implemented a program known as shock therapy in economics. Shock therapy is by and large a tool used by neoliberals, especially the IMF and the World Bank, that quickly kills off government subsidies and reverts government-owned assets into the hands of private investors. So during this time we see massive privatization of the economy. Um, every every other university in Russia at the time unfamiliar with Western style economics, the free market model, the Milton Friedman way of thinking. And so it was into this climate that HSE was born. HSE was brought into existence with an inherent mission to help the Ministry of Economy. And so it's worthwhile to consider HSE's special relationship with the government. And while typically many other Russian universities report directly to the Ministry of Education, HSE's case is very special in that HSE reports directly to the Ministry of Economy. And I think it's worthwhile to consider what this relationship entails. Can HSE be viewed as a kind of national hero or a favorite son as a result of this relationship. As a government-funded university, HSE was also permitted to charge tuition, just as other universities were freed up in the 90s to begin charging tuition. But this meant that HSE had to develop a curriculum that somehow stood out from other universities, especially its rival, Moscow State University. The result was that HSE developed a reputation for a strong modern economic curriculum integrated with its acclaimed expertise in mathematics. So HSE was a unique institution in that it held on to valuable parts of its past while offering instruction on the new topic of free market enterprise. And in many ways, at the curriculum level, HSE was a trailblazer. The electronic library that it set up, um, certainly the new content, the new economic content that it offered to its students, as well as the ties that it established uh, with foreign universities such as London School of Economics and the programs that resulted from these relationships with these foreign universities. As individuals, employees at HSC demonstrated a Western, or I think a more accurate way of describing it is a neoliberal way of thinking, an aggressive way of thinking, an extremely aggressive way of thinking. The new economic reality was essentially what we have in the States. A person either eats or they are eaten. HSE employees demonstrated, at least in word, combativeness, aggression, and a level of illegality, however minor that illegality may have been. All of my information comes from two sources. One, it comes from Isaac Frauman's chapter, and two, it comes from HSC's website. I think this is in stark contrast to the way other government-funded Russian universities conduct their affairs. As a result, this makes HSC stand out from the crowd. It makes HSC unique at the individual level of analysis. This this overt aggressiveness. Frauman is keen on comparing HSC's R&D costs with European competitors. It certainly does demonstrate how far HSC has come as a research university in only 21 years. But HSC's success hasn't stopped it from forming strategic partnerships with banking entities as well as former IMF and World Bank executives, which would be Stanley Fischer and another individual at HSC. Today, HSC is very much an employer and not simply another university. HSE operates just as much as a corporation as it does an institute of higher education. And so we can see the distinctive beginning of HSE, HSE's distinctive strengths in the curriculum or curricula that it offered its students. Its highly aggressive way of approaching problems, an aggressive mentality. And we've seen that HSE has remained distinctive 21 years on in 2013. So what is the conclusion? One conclusion to be drawn from this can be found on HSE's website. On the web page titled Why HSE, the first bullet point at the bottom of the page reads that HSE's mission is to, quote, generate and disseminate modern economic knowledge among Russian business and, government, end quote. That is the priority goal of HSE. And so it would not be a stretch to conclude that HSE is a radical institution, much more radical than Moscow State University, I believe. I think Moscow State University is much more conservative institution than HSE. HSE is quite radical. And so HSE's academic interests are subservient to the work it does for the government and businesses.